Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if a simple trick can really help you feel less stressed? Well, this new paper dives into exactly that, looking at how we think about our thoughts and feelings, and how that might affect our distress. This paper is a critical look at two studies by Foody and colleagues, published in 2013 and 2015. The big question these studies try to answer is whether there is a difference in how effective two ways of thinking about ourselves are, specifically when dealing with distress or difficult feelings. Think of it like this: are some ways of relating to your thoughts better for reducing stress than others? And importantly, does this connect to bigger ideas in therapy, like acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT and its relationship with a theory called relational frame theory, or RFT? RFT is a sciencey way of explaining how language and thinking work, and ACT is a type of therapy. Many people believe RFT provides a solid foundation for ACT's methods. So, what did Foody and his team do in their original 2013 study? They basically came up with two ways to approach difficult thoughts and feelings. One way was called the distinction condition. Here, people were told to try and see their thoughts and feelings as separate from their true self, like saying, "That is just a thought, it's not me." The other way was the hierarchy condition. This involved trying to see your thoughts and feelings as being contained within a bigger sense of self. Think of it as yourself being like a big container that holds all your experiences, including the tough ones. They tested these on people who were feeling distressed after being asked to think about something negative. The original study found that the hierarchy condition, the one where you see yourself as a container, seemed to reduce stress a little bit more than the distinction condition, where you see thoughts as separate. This finding was really exciting because it seemed to support the ACT idea of self as context, which is similar to that container idea. It also seemed to strengthen the link between ACT and RFT. The problem is, this study has been cited a lot, but a follow-up study by the same team in 2015, which was meant to replicate these findings, didn't actually show the same thing. This follow-up study is often overlooked. This is where the current paper, the one we're reanalyzing, comes in. The author noticed that the 2013 study, despite later findings, is still frequently cited as strong evidence for certain ideas. They also point out a broader issue in psychology called the replication crisis, where studies don't always hold up when others try to repeat them. This paper's goal is to critically re-examine those original Foody et al. Studies to see if the evidence for their main claims is actually as strong as people think. Let's dive deeper. In the 2013 study, the researchers were really trying to bridge ACT and RFT. They wanted to see if taking ideas from RFT, like these dyadic relational responses, which are fancy terms for how we relate things, could be used in ACT exercises to help people feel better. They specifically looked at the distinction versus hierarchy of these relational responses. The way they did it was pretty straightforward for a lab study. They had participants experience some distress. Then they gave them one of the two interventions, either the distinction one or the hierarchy one. And then they measured their distress again. They used visual analog scales, which are basically like rulers where you mark how much distress you are feeling. In 2015, they expanded on this by adding more conditions, looking at both self and other focused versions of these ideas. The main claim from Foody et al. 2013 was that the hierarchical intervention was better at reducing distress than the distinction intervention. They reported a statistically significant result for stress, but not for discomfort or anxiety. They interpreted this as the hierarchical approach being superior. However, this is where things get interesting. The author of this reanalysis points out several critical issues. First, they question whether the 2013 study was truly a replication of an earlier study by Luciano and colleagues, as claimed, because there were many significant differences in their study design, sample, and methods. They also found some strange inconsistencies in how the methods were described. For example, both studies mention a reactions questionnaire that includes questions about a car accident, but the method sections don't actually describe a car accident as part of the distress induction. This suggests a potential copy, paste error, or a misunderstanding of what actually happened in the study. A really big problem highlighted is the lack of a control group. When you are trying to see if an intervention works, you need to compare it to something, ideally a group that doesn't get the intervention. This is super important when you are looking at distress, because people naturally tend to feel better over time anyway, a phenomenon called regression to the mean. Without a control group, It is hard to say if the observed improvements were because of the intervention, or just because people would have felt better on their own. The authors even cited previous studies that showed this natural recovery, but didn't use a control in their own work. Now, let's get to the core of the reanalysis. The original paper reported a p-value of 0.04 for stress, meaning there was a 4% chance this result was just random luck. For anxiety and discomfort, the p-values were much higher, meaning it was very likely just chance. The author argues that when you have multiple tests like measuring stress, anxiety, and discomfort, you need to adjust for this multiple testing problem to avoid fooling yourself. When the author applied standard statistical corrections for multiple tests, those flukometer readings for anxiety and discomfort, and even stress became non-significant. This means when you account for the fact they tested 3 things, the evidence for a difference between the interventions washes away. Beyond the statistical corrections, the author also argues the statistical tests used in the original study weren't the best way to answer their question. The way they analyze the data using something called an RM ANOVA doesn't directly compare the groups after the intervention to see who felt better. It looks at changes over time in a way that could be influenced by things other than the intervention itself. So, to get a clearer picture, the author performed their own reanalysis. They took the summary statistics from both Foody studies and performed different types of statistical tests, including those that directly compare the groups after the intervention. They even used a multiverse analysis, which is a very thorough way to check if the results are consistent across many different reasonable ways of analyzing the data. They meticulously extracted mean standard deviations and sample sizes from the original papers to run these new tests. They focused on the comparison between the distinction and hierarchy groups, as these were the ones most relevant to the primary claim. They ran Welch's t-tests, which are good for comparing 2 groups, and calculated Hedges G effect sizes. Remember, a positive Hedges G would mean the hierarchical approach was better at reducing distress. They looked at the results both with and without corrections for multiple testing, and also considered controlling for baseline scores to be extra sure. To get an overall sense of distress, they even created a pooled measure by averaging the 3 outcome variables. This is another way to test the broader claim that one intervention is generally better than the other. The results of this rigorous reanalysis are striking. Across all the different ways they analyzed the data, for both the 2013 study and the 2015 replication, they consistently found null results. What that means is that the confidence intervals for their effect sizes nearly always included 0. In simple terms, the flukometer showed that any observed differences were likely just due to random chance, not the intervention itself. The hierarchical approach didn't reliably reduce distress more than the distinction approach. This is a crucial finding because it directly challenges the conclusions drawn from the original studies. The author concludes that the data in Foody et al. 2013 and 2015 simply do not support the claim that hierarchical framing is superior for reducing distress. This reanalysis raises serious questions about how these studies have been interpreted and cited. The author points out that many influential textbooks and articles have taken the findings of Foody et al. 2013 at face value, uncritically accepting the claims of superiority without acknowledging the issues or the failed replication in 2015. This can lead to flawed clinical training and practice, where interventions are recommended based on weak or misleading evidence. The author emphasizes that this isn't to say ACT or self as context are ineffective. It is about the credibility of a specific claim based on specific data. The studies by Foody and colleagues as they stand don't provide that credible evidence. The author also reflects on whether this is an isolated issue. They suggest that the issues found in these studies and the way they've been cited might be indicative of broader problems in scientific reporting and citation practices. The replication crisis, after all, showed that problems can spread. It highlights the importance of being critical consumers of research, even when it comes from influential sources. So, what is the takeaway? This paper is a powerful example of how reanalysis and critical evaluation are vital for building a reliable scientific understanding. It shows that even widely cited studies can have flaws, and that a closer look can reveal a different story. It's a reminder for all of us, whether we're researchers, therapists, or just curious individuals, to question, to dig deeper, and to demand strong evidence, especially when it comes to things that affect our well-being. It is important that research like this is done, even when it challenges established ideas, for the betterment of science and clinical practice. The author's dedication to transparency is also commendable. Sharing all their data and code, what this research ultimately tells us is that good intentions and exciting theoretical links aren't enough. We need robust, replicable evidence. The initial excitement around Foody et al. 2013 might have been premature. And the failure to replicate and the issues with the original analysis mean we can't currently rely on those studies to support the idea that hierarchy interventions are definitively better than distinction interventions for reducing distress. Future research should definitely include proper control groups and more rigorous statistical methods to truly understand these interventions. Thanks for joining me on RUBIN'S Mind Lab. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more science deep dives. See you next time.